B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, kind of feels like a Monday. November 13th, 2018. We took a long weekend for the Veterans Day holiday. And I've got news that's stacked up as far as the eye can see here. And we start with the ignoramus, President 45, who embarrassed us in France and tweeted insults at Californians as we wrestle with 3 devastating wildfires. And his ignorance knows no bounds. Let's start with the wildfires, and let me acknowledge that I typically don't cover natural disasters like this, but because of the president's intervention, he injected himself into this, and because there are so many screwy conspiracy theories circulating about what causes wildfires in California, I will break with my pattern. So I'm looking at the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle. 117,000 acres have burned. A confirmed 42 people have died, but the numbers will go much higher. There are at least 200 people still missing in the area of Chico Paradise, which was struck by the first firestorm last week. And I want to clarify, because many people take the president's tweets about forest fires and say, well, you know, I'm not in California. I don't really know the landscape there, so I guess Trump's got a point about vegetation management, right? Forest management. Well, these are not forest fires that we are currently dealing with. It's brush, chaparral, grasses, and, yes, there are fuels, but they are caused by years of drought. We had a little bit of relief 2 years ago with a winter full of rains that led to floods. And we are now back on a drought footing. Typically, by this time in November, we've had 2 or 3 major rainstorms, and so far, only one has passed through my part of Northern California. And I also want to at least enumerate the initial suspicions for the causes of these fires. Because the fire that took out Paradise and that continues to threaten Chico and surrounding areas, it's called the Camp Fire. A lot of people think, oh, it started at a camp. A bunch of, screwy people who are in a tent let their fire get out of control. The leading cause at this point, suspected in the Camp Fire, is that PG&E, which I regularly criticize as a rogue utility, they knew that they had a problem. The day before, they contacted a person in the community of Pulga, where the Camp Fire started, and said, hey, we've got to cross your property to address a power line problem, a power equipment problem. And PG&E has already filed notice with the State Public Utilities Commission, a report of the effort to restart that power line that preceded the fire by less than an hour. Now, these are early indications, but we saw this last year with the devastating wildfires in the wine country. In 13 of the 16 fires that started there are laid at the liability of PG&E. And I'll wait until we have a full investigation to add my denunciation of PG&E. But when Trump talks about our failure to manage forests, well, the facts are that 60% of the forest land in California is his responsibility, and the feds have been cutting the budgets for tree trimming and removal of dead trees. We have 115 million estimated dead trees in California because of years of drought. These are clear indications of climate change and the devastating events that are linked to the warming of the earth, the lengthening of our fire season, the dry conditions that enabled this. And the vast majority of, I just told you that, of forest land in California is owned and controlled by the federal government. California only controls about 8% of the forests inside our state. And take it from Brownie. You remember heck of a job, Brownie, the guy who George W. Bush praised for his bungled response to Hurricane Katrina? Well, he took time off from his horsey riding. And he said, forestry management in this country is something we should debate. It's something we should talk about. But in the middle of the fire? That's not the time to talk about it. Well, somebody tell our dear tweeter. Now, the Woolsey fire, which is devastating Malibu and has led to the loss of many expensive homes of movie stars and other people. Well, according to Physicians for Social Responsibility, this fire originated at a facility called Santa Susana Field Laboratory, a former nuclear and rocket engine testing site. Footage from local TV showed the flames surrounding rocket test stands, and the fire's progress through to Oak Park indicates that much of the toxic site burned. So here is Dr. Robert Dodge, president of Physicians for Social Responsibility, L.A. We know what substances are on the site and how hazardous they are. We're talking about incredibly dangerous radionuclides, maybe I didn't pronounce that, radionuclides, and toxic chemicals such as trichloroethylene, perchlorate, dioxins, and heavy metals. These toxic materials are in the soil and vegetation, and when it burns and becomes airborne in smoke and ash, there's a real possibility of heightened exposure for area residents. And this has been the subject of dispute for many years as local residents have complained about upticks in cancers and other maladies related to the rocket testing and a nuclear meltdown that occurred at this location many years ago. So when Trump wants to blame California for the wildfires in California, at least in these two cases, you can't blame authorities for not trimming enough trees or, taking out the dead wood. And so his comments are purely ignorant. And it is willful ignorance on his part. His partisanship and his, California didn't support him, therefore we are all evil. And we need to be punished by our stern father. And so far, the White House says Trump has no plans to visit California to examine the damage from the fires. Let's keep it that way. So now I want to address the wild armchair experts who show up in my Facebook feed and just infuriate me. Maybe you know of Peter Dale Scott. He used to teach at UC Berkeley. He is a national authority, a skeptic on the Kennedy assassination, and many other deep state activities. And on Saturday, he put up a post, California wildfire becomes state's most destructive on record, and he made a couple of comments. And immediately, the people who I guess have followed his investigation of other conspiracies just load up and fire. Here's Darius Mishler, climate scam. Look up geoengineering, direct energy weapons, and Agenda 21. And this guy dominates the thread. He keeps pushing back on anybody like Jan Normandale. Climate change, like scientific measurements of temperature and sciencey stuff like that, impossible. It's all a left-wing liberal plot, I tell you. And then we get people who say UN Agenda 21 again, and, let's see, blaming forest management on global warming. And then we have people who say that, this is part of geoengineering. And I really wish these people would focus on something else, because it is just so enraging when we're in the middle of a disaster and a crisis like this that is not abating. We have hope with forecasts of rain starting next Monday. But it's a long way from here to there. Now, Trump was not content to insult Californians while he was in France. He was supposed to be there to honor America's involvement in World War I. But, of course, he flaked out of a cemetery visit on Saturday because it was raining. And he says that they wouldn't fly the helicopter, and then the Secret Service nixed a plan for him to go by ground because his motorcade would tie up all of Paris. And, of course, we don't know the exact reason why that happened. But Ben Rhodes, who was a top staffer to President Obama, he said, look, there's always a backup plan that if it rains, we don't take the helicopter. And Trump sent his chief of staff and the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and whether they went by helicopter or not, they did go to Belleau Wood in his stead. So Trump then starts to attack Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, for a speech that he gave where he indirectly lectured Trump about the dangers of nationalism. And Trump is just using insults and conflated information, you can't call them facts, to create these little insult bombs that he puts out on Twitter. So this is a deep insult to the French people, and Trump has to know it. Macron suggests building its own army to protect Europe against the U.S., China, and Russia. Now, what he actually said was that Europe should build its own cyber command to protect against those cyber warriors. And so Trump twists that into creating its own army, and then he insults the French. It was Germany in World Wars I and II. How did that work out for France? They were starting to learn German in Paris before the U.S. came along. Pay for NATO or not. Now, this idea of leading through insults, leading by denigrating people, by insulting an entire nation, oh, it is just so embarrassing. So embarrassing, and we have to live through it time and time again. On Friday, late in the day, I got word that there was kind of a breakthrough between Israel and Hamas. And Israel, with some brokering from Egypt, we're told, had allowed $15 million in cash to be delivered. Qatar supplied the money, and it was used to provide back pay to people who work in the government in Gaza. Some of those are Hamas members. So this was a remarkable step by Israel to ease tensions. And apparently, it was a ruse, a kind of trap that they laid. Because on Sunday night, a group of Israeli commandos entered Gaza, according to the Associated Press, apparently on a reconnaissance mission. And this is also described as a botched Israeli military raid. They were discovered by Palestinians inside Gaza, setting off a battle that left 7 militants, including a Hamas commander and an Israeli military officer, dead. This led to the most robust round of rocket and mortar fire from Gaza into Israel, described by observers, the most different launches in recent history, some 400 in about a 12 or 15-hour period. So late today, today, our time, Hamas and other smaller militant groups released a statement saying they had accepted an Egyptian-mediated agreement to halt fire. No word from Israel. Medics in Gaza said 5 people were killed, 2 of them were militants. In the Israeli coastal city of Ashkelon, a 40-year-old civilian was killed, and it turned out he was a Palestinian from the occupied West Bank who was living in Israel. 20 Israelis have been wounded in this latest exchange of violence. And residents in Gaza reported that Israel was launching low-yield munition warning strikes, what they call roof knocks, on targets, and then they come back about 20 minutes later and blow them up for real. So that is the scene in Gaza today, and I'm really sorry to see it devolve into this when it appeared there might have been some promising shifts. Also, just a quick note that the United Nations has received the latest report from the International Atomic Energy Agency certifying that Iran is in compliance with the nuclear deal that Trump breached earlier this year. Back to the battle over the tight races in Georgia for governor and in Florida for governor and senator. Let's go to Georgia first. A federal judge has barred the Secretary of State's office from immediately certifying election results, told them to wait and resolve problems with thousands of provisional ballots that voters were forced to shift to when they found they had been purged from the voting rolls at their precinct. A federal judge ordered Gwinnett County, which is largely African American, to stop rejecting absentee ballots with minimal errors like a missing or incorrect birth date. And we have an example of that I'll share with you in a moment. The ruling by U.S. District Judge Lee Martin May addresses concerns raised by voting rights advocates on behalf of several voters and by Carolyn Bourdeaux, the Democratic candidate fighting Representative Rob Woodall in the state's 7th Congressional District. So nominally, today is the deadline for the 159 counties to certify their elections. But a different federal judge said late Monday that the Secretary of State's office could not certify results before this Friday, and that it had to immediately establish and publicize on its website a secure and free access hotline or website for provisional ballot voters to access to determine whether their provisional ballots were counted, and if not, the reason why. Now, the margin there is 59,000 votes in favor of the Republican Brian Kemp. He managed to purge enough to keep the number, at least so far, to his advantage. And they are right on the verge of the level that would lead to either a recount or a runoff. So here are the factors. Abrams needs to pick up 21,000 additional votes to force a runoff and 19,000 to initiate a recount. So this extra time could work to her favor. But, when the margin is that great, it is hard to, we have to hope on behalf of Abrams that in some of these counties she rolled up 60-70% of the total vote, and if that's the case, she might be able to close the gap. But get this, on Friday, I received word from election activists that 12 counties in Georgia had already submitted their elections as certified, leaving provisional ballots uncounted. And one of the counties, Jenkins, certified results within 2 hours of the poll closing on election night. Now, these are clearly premature moves, and there are also issues related to absentee voter files in Clay, McIntosh, and Marion counties, where they rejected ballots for signature mismatches. And who, what, why? Profiles a voter who submitted her absentee ballot because she knew she was going to be out of state. She did it in mid-October. She is 82-year-old woman. Her name is Desiree Martindale. So she submitted her ballot, but she said it has been rejected because she failed to put her date of birth on the ballot form. Now, that is irrelevant information, and a court has ruled that it's immaterial. But these are the kind of tactics that were used to deny people the right to vote and to try to protect a purloined victory for Brian Kemp in Georgia. Meanwhile, Trump and many on the Republican right have been making false claims. Rick Scott, the governor of Florida, who's in that contested Senate race with Bill Nelson, they keep claiming that there's fraud and that everybody knows it, and the Democrats are just gaming the system here. I heard Rush Limbaugh this morning saying the Democrats just weren't willing to accept that they lost. But they haven't counted all the votes yet, and that is very clear. And Trump has been saying an honest vote count is no longer possible. Ballots are massively infected. Really? What kind of virus does a ballot get? He has sent 7 tweets about the election, baselessly making claims like trying to steal 2 big elections in Florida. Rick Scott was up by 50,000 votes on Election Day. Now they've found many votes, and he's only up 15,000. So Trump is actively trying to undermine the process of an election that's already troubled. And he wants to just give up on the vote count. And he wants to just decree that the vote totals on election night, and what hour do you choose, Donald, that's most favorable to you? He wants to just arbitrarily lock down the vote count and declare Rick Scott and Ron DeSantis the winners in Florida. And it's just really incredible to see them ginning this up once again. And in Florida, a state judge lectured Rick Scott and his campaign, saying they had brought false claims of fraud, but found zero evidence And there is a machine recount underway in both of those races, and I think also the election for the state attorney general in Florida. Now, the machine recounts don't offer a lot of hope. They don't offer much credibility, because if they're just churning the same data that they have churned before, then you can't expect a real different result. So we will see what happens next in Florida. Now, as we look back a week after the midterm election, the Democrats in the House have picked up a confirmed 32 seats. It could go as high as 40. In the Senate, Kyrsten Sinema was declared the winner in Arizona. She is a former progressive who ran a stealth campaign as some sort of a moderate, slightly conservative person. So we have no idea what kind of a chameleon Kyrsten Sinema will be when she reports to the United States Senate in January, but certainly better than having her Republican opponent pick up that seat. Also, when we look at where the Democrats won, well, they started with Republican-held districts where Hillary Clinton got more votes than Trump in 16, and they may ultimately capture about 20 of those districts. In Southern California, Dana Rohrabacher, a 15-term Republican, arch-conservative guy, he went down in defeat. They've declared that race in favor of Harley Ruda, who joined the Democratic Party after being a lifelong Republican just before he announced he was entering the race. And I point that out because this new House majority is not going to be as progressive as many of us wished it could be. Now, gerrymandering really helped limit the losses for Republicans. They didn't lose a single seat in the heavily gerrymandered states of Ohio, Wisconsin, and North Carolina. And compare that to Pennsylvania, where last January a court ordered the congressional lines to be redrawn. At the beginning of the process, Republicans held 13 of Pennsylvania's 18 seats. As of today, the seats are divided evenly, 9 each, between Democrats and Republicans. One of the most watched new members of the House is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the New York woman who won an upset victory over a long-time Democratic operative. And yesterday, she went to Washington. She had said she doesn't have the money to pay rent in Washington. I hope somebody is hosting her for free. Anyway, she went to a rally of climate change activists. And she was also there with Rashida Tlaib, and I have trouble with her name, Tlaib. She is the Muslim woman from Detroit who was elected to Congress. Now, Tlaib went to this rally, but Ocasio-Cortez followed the activists into Nancy Pelosi's office. And depending on who you talk to, she was either joining them in protesting the lack of emphasis on climate change in the Democratic agenda, or she was supporting Nancy Pelosi's effort to establish a House committee like the one that she did after she became Speaker in 2007, which was it was called the Green New Energy Committee or something like that. So in any case, almost every move Ocasio-Cortez makes is going to be scrutinized by the media. Now, I want to commend The Guardian in Britain because they are the first mainstream media outlet that I've seen using the words constitutional crisis in a headline related to Trump's interim nominee for Attorney General, whose name is Matt Whitaker. And I do consider this to be a congressional crisis. And Chuck Schumer, the leading Democrat in the Senate, is timidly suggesting that. He said, well, we plan to tie legislation protecting Bob Mueller to a spending bill that must pass in order to prevent a government shutdown and force the president's hand. If Whitaker stays, he will create a constitutional crisis by inhibiting Mueller or firing Mueller, said Schumer. Now, as you know, I believe the crisis is already here. And I believe the Democrats are not responding to it in a crisis mode. And we've got Jerry Nadler, who will chair the Judiciary Committee in the House, and he said, my first witness is going to be Matt Whitaker. And Jerry, I think it'll be all over by then. Matt Whitaker will have done what he's been put up to do. The hatchet man will strike. And I think Democrats should be throwing a huge set of hurdles in front of Whitaker. I mean, my city attorney here in San Francisco, Dennis Herrera, has sent an unprecedented letter to the Justice Department questioning the legality of Trump's appointment of Matthew Whitaker. There are a series of cases, including related to immigration, that San Francisco has sued the government on, and they need to know who they're dealing with. They know Jeff Sessions is gone, but they are moving to determine the legal justification for the appointment. And the Attorney General of Maryland took a similar step. He filed papers demanding that this be reviewed. He is Attorney General Brian Frosh. He says Trump's appointment of Whitaker is unconstitutional, and he should be replaced by Deputy Attorney Rosenstein. This legal challenge comes as part of Maryland's ongoing federal lawsuit trying to force the Trump administration to uphold a key provision of Obamacare. And who the Attorney General is at the core of the lawsuit. Every day I pause for a second to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And let's see who's on the PayPal list today. Ethan Knox, Stuart Russell, Andrew Rush, Brian Massey. They each kick in $5 or $10 a month. Can you do it too? I'd be much obliged. Come on over to peterbcollins.com, click on menu, then click on Become a Subscriber. You'll be on the sign-up page where you can choose $5, $10, $20 a month. Our $50 annual subscription can earn you a bonus gift, a copy of John Dist's rock and roll CD called American University. I told you there's a whole pile of news, and so I'm going to go into overtime here and try to cover as much as I can today. There were at least 10 stories that I didn't even put in the stack, and I hope to get to them in the next couple of days. Another change that is a bit surprising, at least to me, is that media rumors are that Kirstjen Nielsen, the Secretary of Homeland Security, will be the next to leave the Trump administration. And this is because the president is angry that despite his effort to divide families, to create groups of hostages, to announce zero tolerance, to send a message to Central America not to come, deploying the military to do nothing at the border, creating this outrage over the caravan and the invasion of America, well, he's blaming it all on Nielsen. And we're told that in the next few days, she will be shown the door. October was the month that showed the highest level of people trying to cross the border. 23,000 people in families surrendered or were arrested by the Border Patrol agents, a record in that month. It is remarkable to see what's going on. And I'll just ask this question. Is Chris Kobach on the short list to replace Kirstjen Nielsen? Now get this. Turkey has released more of the audio tape, they say, is of the goings-on in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul on the day when Jamal Khashoggi was assassinated. And we are told that the recording includes a member of the kill team picking up the phone, calling a superior back in Saudi Arabia, saying, "Tell your boss that the mission had been completed." Now, this is seen as some of the strongest evidence directly linking Prince Mohammed bin Salman to the killing of Khashoggi. But the U.S. is not having anything of it. John Bolton, who says he hasn't listened to the recording, but he has talked to other people who did, and it doesn't directly implicate the prince. That's not the conclusion I think the people who heard it have come to. Yeah, denial will get you really far on this one. And the Trump administration has already signaled that the response to the Khashoggi killing is merely to limit the use of U.S. planes to refuel fighter jets in Yemen. And we are going to impose sanctions on Saudis who don't care. That is the total response. And it's because the Trump administration wants to invade Iran. And they want Saudi and Israeli support for that at all costs. It has kind of snuck up on us here in the United States, but Brexit is reaching a critical stage. And we are seeing Prime Minister May scramble. She's being attacked from all sides as whether this is going to be a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit. As rumors surface in the U.S. that Robert Mueller is targeting Nigel Farage, one of the leaders of the Brexit campaign, The Guardian reports after months of prevarication, the government and parliament are reaching the point where choices about Brexit that they've all been avoiding since the summer of 2016, can no longer be avoided. Some key decisions may be taken within the next 24 hours. We'll see if we can get a good update on that and bring it to you later this week. Rupert Murdoch owns the Wall Street Journal. Murdoch has been a staunch ally of Donald Trump. Murdoch's newspaper published a blockbuster story on November 9th, which is based on 36 sources who are unnamed, but I would guess they're linked to Michael Cohen, to the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York investigating that case. But it is rich in detail, and it shows that Donald Trump personally worked with David Pecker of the National Enquirer to silence the McDougal woman, Karen McDougal, that he directly managed the Michael Cohen efforts to hush these women up by paying them money. And the detail is very rich here. The surprising part is that it shows up in a Murdoch paper at this fluid stage of the Mueller investigation. And this is a first. Jerome Corsi, who is a lowlife in the media world, he reported for InfoWorld and Breitbart and World Nut Daily. Well, he is trying to inoculate himself in advance. He said, "I'm going to be arrested by the special counsel for some form of lying." He said that he was subjected to 40 hours of questioning and that his brain turned to mush, and he can't remember if he incriminated himself or not. Tom Steyer, the San Francisco billionaire who's been running TV ads to the tune of $50 million promoting the impeachment of Trump, took to the pages of the New York Times last week. For too long, Democratic leaders have convinced their fellow elected officials that bland, non-confrontational, and incremental centrism is the way to win elections and make progress. In truth, it's just the easiest way to protect the balance of power in Washington. By trying to meet a corrupt Republican Party halfway, instead of taking clear stands for what's right, they have failed to define the party and failed to protect their constituents. Should the establishment refuse to give up conventional orthodoxy and take up impeachment proceedings when the new Congress convenes, new members, many of whom ran and won because of their promise to stand up to the president, must challenge the establishment and demand a say over the agenda. He's talking to Nancy Pelosi, but doesn't mention her name anywhere in his op-ed. The Washington Post notes that Jim Acosta, the CNN reporter who was bounced from the White House last week after he tried to get Trump to stop interrupting his questions long enough that he could finish them. Well, the White House is shifting its story. It's no longer about how he touched that intern as he tried to hold on to the wireless microphone. No, it's because he asked the president 2 questions, each of which the White House claims the president answered. He did not. And then physically refused to surrender the White House microphone to an intern. And so they are trying to shift the narrative here to claim that this is not so much about the physical altercation, but it's about his behavior in the press room. And I admit that Acosta is a grandstander. But on that particular day last week, I support what he tried to do. He was polite, respectful. He was peppered with insults and interruptions from Trump, and he stood his ground. Finally, today, it's not a surprise. Federal reports indicate that hate crimes increased by 17% during Trump's first year in office. The targets, black people, Jews, Muslims, LGBT, those groups and other minorities all saw sharp increases. Total number of hate crimes reported up to 7,175 from 6,100 in 2016. The majority of the incidents in the new FBI report were racially motivated with crimes targeting black people accounting for half of the attacks. Thanks for joining me today for my News and Comment podcast. You're free to share it far and wide. I hope you will. You'll find it on YouTube for easy access. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.